Hello everyone. So I'm working on this commission and I wanted to try something a bit different. And so I thought I would record the process and just show you guys how it worked out. So I don't know if this is common, like if a lot of people paint this way, but this is very new for me. But basically what I did is this kind of dead coloring that's underneath it is still wet. I painted this a few days or like 2 days ago, but I made sure to make sure that it was still wet, not even like sticky, tacky. I used some titanium white and some slow dryers as far as like oil paints go. So I knew this was going to be still wet and not even tacky yet 2 days later when I had another chance to work on it. And so basically my intention was basically to try to kind of focus on values and kind of putting in these like big things with kind of a dead coloring to begin with. And then what I'm doing now in recording is basically using synthetic brushes, so like much softer brushes than what I normally work with, which is much more like bristle hog hair brushes, and very chromatic colors, and to kind of work almost like how I imagine like working with like a fresco is like, where you're kind of painting into the paint. And so the goal for that was basically to try to be able to unify but still play around with these very chromatic colors, but to have it all be slightly neutralized by the wet paint that's underneath it. And so it was an interesting strategy. I wanted to kind of try it out and see how it worked. But I guess one of the aesthetics that I really don't like, and that this would help prevent a lot, is if you're using with paints that dry really fast, so like lead-based pigments, which this is just an intermediary step between like drawing and painting, like the first kind of pass with paint. So I'll be definitely painting over this, and I'll be using lead white on top of it. But right now I've just been using titanium white, and I'm okay with the opacity that it gives, because I kind of like the idea of having like the underlayers be quite opaque, and then being able to use lead white and some of these colors that are more transparent in the layers on top, so that if you have this really strong, well-drawn, opaque layer underneath it, and then adding all these kind of building it up with more transparent layers, you still kind of get that reverberation of the strength that's underneath. And so that's kind of the idea behind that. But basically, one thing I've noticed, like if you come back to a piece every day and you're adding new layers to it, it can, like I've seen people, like obviously if you know how to paint really well, that's not an issue. But for those people who are not super experienced painting and working with lead white, there can be the tendency to kind of have this crustiness to it that I absolutely hate. Some people, I've seen like professional painters that like this is what they like to do. They like to like build on that really like kind of crusty, it's like a dry bread effect is what it looks like to me. But I think it's very aesthetically unappealing to me. And so one thing I wanted to try was to try to see if I painted a bit more wet into wet at the start, and then started building up in more transparent layers on top, what kind of effects that would give. And so I've been really trying to figure out different ways to go about painting, because there's so many different ways for painting. And when you go to like a very like traditional school, they teach you one way, and that's great. But I think once you have those skills and kind of a more universal skills of how to learn for yourself, ultimately, that's like the best skill you could learn. Once you kind of have that under your belt and kind of know how to go about a painting in any way that's comfortable, that leads to a positive result at the end, then you can get a bit more kind of experimental and play around with things that are maybe more personal, so they wouldn't be good to explore in an academic setting, but would be perfect to explore personally, trying to figure out what kind of aesthetic, how you want to paint, what kind of works best for each person. So one thing I've been thinking about is what to say for like the audio portion of this video, because I find just like narrating over what I'm doing in the actual like time-lapse video is just like extremely boring. And so one thing I was thinking about, and I've been having a lot of people ask me different kind of questions all around the same topic, which is going about like marketing and kind of the business aspect of it, because a lot of, it's been a couple of years since I've been out of a school setting. I mean, realistically, it's only been a year, but I guess more of like a year and a half. But I've always kind of been focused on like the business aspect of things. So I feel like have much more experience at marketing and kind of the entrepreneurial side of art than just like a year and a half. But I've been, selling my own work, doing art fairs, art galleries, stuff like that for 4 years now, give or take, maybe a little bit longer. And so I guess just a couple of things off the top of my head that is kind of like the reoccurring questions that I've been asked a lot. One is like, how to get started with the gallery and the whole like kind of gallery environment. And what I've found is that the local galleries, whatever's that small nonprofit or just like small local gallery in your hometown. This is like speaking from the US. It might be very different in Europe. I'm very not familiar with that. But to get kind of acclimated into like the local environment is so great. There was an artist or an art gallery I worked with in my hometown for many years, but it was the first one that I really started to work, show work at. And it was like a for-profit gallery, and this person was like so incredibly helpful because she was teaching me. I would bring in a painting and the backing, the hanging and the backing would just be like a disaster. She'd be like, no, you can't show work like that. And it's like all these things that you don't learn at the academy, you kind of learn from like the real world experience. And it's much better to have those experiences that expose you for being naive at a local environment before you start, getting a connection with a national or an international gallery, or, have some sort of like really well-known prestige on the line that you then mess up because you don't know how to talk to a gallery owner, you don't know how to present your artwork, you don't know how to present yourself, and the kind of the etiquette behind all those things. And so I think all those things can get ironed out by working at a local gallery. And I think there's an unbelievable amount of value to that, way more than just like, if you're actually going to be able to sell any work or not there. Another thing I think that is really good is a lot of people are really hesitant for like selling their work and like the pricing and all that stuff. And I've found that I've taken like the kind of the pricing of like how to price the artwork in a very kind of straightforward way. And I think it's basically like, just keep like sell your work at what it can sell for. And then if you consistently sell work for 6 months, then you can maybe like incrementally like raise the value of your work up. And then, it keeps selling. And if you reach a point where your work stops selling because it's too expensive, don't lower your price, but you have to figure out a way how to bring more value into your work, whether that's investing in higher quality frames, just whatever you can think of, spending more time on the paintings, doing different subject matter, different, like for me, a lot of it was investing in the highest quality art supplies I could possibly use. And writing that off and using that as an asset to help value my work at a higher price point. And so I think like, especially when you're just starting out, like your priority should be to sell your work, even if it's way under what you think it should be. But maybe that's a bit kind of controversial, but the person who is most likely to buy your painting, who has already bought in one. And so I've had, I've been doing these shows for like 4 years now. And I get a lot of people now at this point who had bought a print for, $25 or $40 back 3 years ago or 4 years ago, or these small plein air paintings or even like big paintings. And now it's, 2-3 years later and they have another spot on their wall and some disposable income. And, they've been looking at your painting for 3 years and they want another one. And I think that's unbelievably priceless to have those kind of people. And it really is true that like, you don't need to go like generic and wide. You don't need to have like 100,000 Instagram followers. That would be great. But if you have 100 people that buy one of your paintings every 2 years, like, you could sustain yourself off that, like if you do it right. So I think the priority should be on those few like super fans, those people that really, really support you. Because with art, like paintings can be very expensive. Like the work I sell for, like I have larger paintings. The largest painting that I've sold to date was for $9,000. So one thing that just popped in my mind that is such a good story that taught me so much about this topic is I did this painting This was this past summer, and it was of the most niche, unknown, obscure reference ever for a painting that I've ever done. It was about like the alternative origin of the Santa motif in the Christmas story, of how like Santa, reindeer, gifts, Christmas trees could have reference to like a Nordic tribe using plant medicine revolving around the Amanita muscaria mushroom, the red and white mushroom that you see like in the Mario video game. But it was just this very obscure reference, and I built this whole painting around it, very elaborate. It was for a group show where the theme was something red, so I thought these red mushrooms would be a perfect theme for that. And this person at this art fair I was doing, like, you know, no, like I hadn't met anyone that had understood, who had gotten the reference, and this was, you know, showing it to lots of people at the fairs. And this one lady comes up with her husband and looks at it and just like starts telling her husband like everything about it, like even more stuff than I didn't even realize about it. And she's like, I'd never seen anyone paint this before, and I was like, I'd never met anyone who knew about this before. And it was such this deep connection that she was like, you know, this painting was made, this was painted for me. And she ended up buying that piece because it was just unbelievably personal to her. And so I think, you know, this idea of like, you know, curtailing to a large audience, like if you just paint scenes of Venice or lemons or something that sells really well, I don't think that approach actually works. I think it's like this illusion that it works, but like for what I have found to be the most like successful as far as like painting what feels meaningful to me and also being able to sell it at the same time, it's to paint, it's to not focus on the large audience, but to focus on the super fan, the super supporter. And so yeah, that was something that really opened my eyes, and it opened my eyes in a way that I didn't realize how powerful that actually was. And it also made me think, well, what other like really kind of specific motifs and stories do I find really fascinating? Because the world's a big place. There's at least one person in the world who also finds that fascinating with enough disposable income. So my strategy has been to paint what I want to paint and then use everything in my power to try to connect the painting with the person who really wants that painting and to try to find them. And so that's the whole thing with marketing your work. I think it's so important to believe that what you have, like what you're trying to do is to make somebody else happy who's having your painting. This isn't like some sort of gimmick or scheme, but you know, you should be selling your work because the person that it will go to will be more happy that they will have it. And I think that's kind of the right mentality to that. So I hope those kind of 2 points give some sort of advice. Those are kind of the two big takeaways that popped in my head from this like 4 or 5 years of kind of working probably like a dozen art fairs at this point, and having like 2 shows, like solo shows, and doing a bunch of group shows and showing at both local and national venues and stuff like that. So yeah, I hope that helps.